thank you everyone for being here with us this morning to the second edition of the Hili Forum. And after the opening speeches and remarks, let's proceed with the rest of day one. I'm very, very excited to be able to moderate the first panel here with an excellent group that we intentionally wanted to bring together the world here at Hili in Abu Dhabi, with perspectives from Europe, from Latin America, from India, and from Africa. You know, much has been said about the state of the world and its divisions and its fragility already. But if we look at the world region by region, we all see that things are changing in different ways everywhere. In Europe, we have the challenge of the war in Ukraine, which has really shattered the assumptions about peace and security for the European continent, something that has been quite dramatic both for the institutions of the European Union and for its member states, but something that the rest of the world has often seen as a reality that other parts of the globe have lived with for a long time: war and conflict. In the Middle East, the devastation in Gaza and the shifting alliances remind us of the fragility of the world that we're entering. We look to Latin America, where we see a region that needs to somehow balance its relationships with the new emerging powers around the world, yet together with its long-standing relationship with the United States. In Asia, we see a rivalry that brings new powers to the front and perhaps may actually be quite decisive for the fate of the rest of the world. And last but not least, in Africa, we see parts with great instability, coups and problems, but yet we also see great hope and innovation in other parts of this massive continent that inspire us for everyone to look forward to the future. So, as we delve into what is the new normal that we are dealing with today, I just want to remind our audience that you will be seeing popping up on the screen somewhere in front of you a QR code. That QR code allows you to log on to our platform and pose questions for our panelists. And those who don't want to pose questions for our panelists are also encouraged to log on to the platform and vote for the questions they like or dislike. And based on their vote, we will also try to integrate them into the discussions today, for which I believe I will need the decisive iPad, but I'm sure somebody will bring that to me today. So, Cathy Ashton, ambassadors, thank you very, very much for being here with us today. And if I may open with a very broad question to all of us. What, from your perspective, defines the new normal of the world that we live in? Cathy, perhaps I can start with you.
Thank you, Nikolay. Just to say it's wonderful to be here and to thank everyone for the organization. I want to say to the Minister that was one of the greatest foreign policy speeches I've heard in a long time. Very thoughtful, and thank you so much, because you've given us a lot to consider. And to say to you, because I never get the chance to do this, how lucky the Anwar Gargash Diplomatic Academy is to have you, Nikolay. You were a brilliant foreign minister, a brilliant colleague in the European Union, worked tirelessly with the UN in this region, and now look at what you're achieving already through the academy. So I never get a chance, so I wanted to do that. The thing is, it's very difficult to imagine that what we have before us is what you might describe as a normal. As the Minister rightly said, this is about finding ways to be resilient in a situation where the world is in flux, where the great power rivalry, the changes have been dramatic, and where countries, regions, and in a sense, the global order is trying to work out how to manage as it goes forward. It feels to me more of a transition than a normality, that we're beginning to move forward into a new order which needs to take into account the issues that we have not addressed, whether that is in terms of the structures that we have, about how the UN works, how the Security Council works, about recognition that economics have changed, politics have changed, that regions have changed, and that you have a growing understanding that the dynamics in the world are not what they were in 1947, 1951. They have changed forever. And so it's how you build a robust global order that allows for the kind of technological changes, economic changes, the capacity to have good ability to be able to trade and work together in a system that was designed for a different time, and how you build now a new set of structures that people can rely on in order to protect them as individuals, as people, and how they themselves will be able to live in a world where, frankly, everybody wants the same thing. They want to be safe, secure, educated, to live well, to see their children grow and have opportunity. It's universal, and it's those universal issues that remain the same. So for me, this is about transition, not normal.
Great, thank you, Kathy. That's a great way to start the conversation. Ambassador Bárcena, you've served in Washington, you've served in Europe, you've negotiated quite a lot in trade deals. Kathy looks at the world as one in transition. Do you think it's transition, or is it permanent, what we're facing now?
I would agree that we are in a transition moment, but at the same time, I don't see it exactly going forward for a future. In some proposals, it seems to be going backwards, but even to the 19th century. And why do I say this? Because we are seeing a misunderstood and radical nationalism in many countries, in which there is a rejection of the other. Instead of cooperation, we are seeing this nationalism and this almost autarky, and a concept of sovereignty as autarky, not a sovereignty as a capacity to negotiate with the other for a common good. On the other side, if we analyze some of the new, what is going on in trade, we are seeing a rejection of the international regime trade that was established after the Second World War, and that was based, as Assistant Minister Nusebe said, trade and economic development will empower security and democracy and more cooperation. And what we're seeing now is an abandonment of this international trade regime towards a mercantilism that characterized the 19th century, in which national objectives prevail over global objectives, in which instead of consensus is unilateralism in evaluation and imposition. And then we have the law of the strongest instead of the needs of everyone. And that is what I see the failure of this, if we call it transition to a new international trade regime. Because if it's not based on the needs and the aspirations of all the 195 countries of the UN, then it cannot survive. If it's only the law of the strongest, it will not be able to survive. Then we see, of course, this power competition. In Latin America and the Caribbean is pretty obvious. Now, Mexico is now the first trading partner of the US. The US imports 16% of all their imports from Mexico. The trade between Mexico and the US almost reaches $1 trillion US dollars a year, with a superávit for Mexico. But if you go through the rest of Latin America, now the main trading partner is China, and also the main investors in ports and infrastructure and in rare minerals. So we are seeing a very deeply divided Latin America in regarding on what should be the economic model based on a state participation on a private sector. What is the attitude towards democracy, towards human rights, towards a relationship with other countries? And we see at the same time that we are having problems to address we're having challenges to address the common problems in the region, which are inequality, poverty, organized crime, justice, and the rule of law. So we know we can identify the challenges. What we don't have now is the institutions and the will of to cooperate. And then you see the Western Hemisphere, as it's called in the US, with the North American region more integrated, US, Mexico, and Canada, but not integrated with the rest of Latin America and the Caribbean. So we have this challenge to go forward. And I personally think that it's not only the relationship of Mexico and Latin America with the US, but also the relationship among us, with Mexico and Brazil being the two poles of the stability of Latin America. So it is easier to identify the challenges than to find the process for the transition. But I would reject that in this moment we are in a new normal. I think we should not accept some of the premises that we are seeing now, but we should aim for resilience and for increasing global cooperation and for a continuous dialogue.
Excellent, thank you so much. Kathy spoke of this as a transition. You added the element of, that some of it actually might be going backwards and rejected its permanent nature. Ambassador Sarna, I'm sure that from an Indian perspective, going back to the 19th century is not the best idea for the future. How do you see this new normal? Do you see it as just a return to old practices, or are there new actors that can actually shape it in a much better way?
Thank you very much, Nikolay, and great pleasure, great honor to be invited to this forum. I think both the previous speakers have made very valid arguments. I would simply say that at one level, the new normal, what we are considering today the new normal, is essentially 4 T's. It's Trumps, tweets, tariffs, and tantrums. But if you take it above to another...
Can you say that again? I want to remember it. Trump, tweets,
I write it down,
tariffs, and tantrums.
That's right. Because a lot of what is emanating as a new normal is just a sense of unpredictability.
Uh-huh.
And that sense of unpredictability is absolutely all-pervasive. It's cutting across regions, it's cutting across objectives, it's cutting across cooperation. And that essentially is why we are talking about the new normal today. In fact, some people have argued that this is not the new normal. What we are going to is what was normal. Only the post-World War II situation that was carved out, what was broadly known as the liberal rule-based international order, and there are arguments that it was only international and not the other two, that was an abnormality. And countries go back to the original state of conflict, competition, confrontation, and less of cooperation. It's unfortunate, but that's one level of thinking. What is today for us the new normal is, besides the unpredictability of our relationship introduced recently by President Trump's 50% tariffs, is also the fact that we are at the heart of the geopolitical confrontation between US and China. And, we have to deal with it, and possibly we can discuss that later. The second aspect of the new normal that is really striking for a country like India, and I'm sure many other countries, is the absolute absence of anything coming out of multilateral institutions. The traditional source of our strength and recognition and collective action is no longer functional. In fact, the UN itself has announced a 20% cut in spending across all its units and all its activity because they themselves are uncertain whether they are relevant anymore. What is the new normal is a complete disregard for international law. So it's again, politics trumps humanitarian law, politics trumps, and I mean trumps, economics. There is also the new normal of technological disruption. So I'm not sure that any or all of these are going to be reversed back. We still have this wishful thinking that someday there will be a reset, and we'll see it all as a disturbing dream, and we'll wake up and everything will be in its place. I don't think that's going to happen. And I don't think we know where this is taking us. So people describe it as we are adrift on an ocean. We don't know where we are going. We don't know if there is going to be a new order.
Yeah.
Because the new order may simply be conflict. There is a rising number of tension spots and hotspots around the world. And is there anybody or any forum or any statesman-like leadership across the world which is going to pull us back from the brink and take us back there? So I'm afraid it's a new normal, but it's constantly evolving. It's evolving day to day. So we can't really set down 10 points and say this is going to be the new normal, because by the time you finish, there'll be something else.
Yeah. It feels like something we just need to adjust to and deal with for this period of time.
I think you have to deal with it day to day, country to country, region to region. There is no one-size-fits-all solution to this. I mean, what Latin America does and what Europe does will be in their context. What India does, we can't even say South Asia because we are not really that kind of an integrated region. So what India does is very different from the Middle East, what the Middle East will do.
Thank you.
So I think each one of us will have to find a way of dealing with this thing. And the only thing that's certain is that it's uncertain.
Great, thank you. Ambassador, you have a lot of experience both on the national security side of things as well as the foreign policy side from a South African perspective. Do you, if you look at the world as it has been just described, it doesn't look very promising, right? Where would you like the new world order, if I can use that term, to be? How would you like to see it so that it addresses some of the challenges that our previous speakers have outlined?
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to participate in this forum. And I would like to extend my greetings to fellow panelists and excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I think the question you're asking is a very pertinent one for us in Africa and, of course, my country, South Africa, as we have indicated. Yes, new normal defined by who? And what becomes new? From our perspective, given our history of colonialism and the struggles for national liberation and independence, and the disruption of the emerging states at the time of independence because of the Cold War. And when in 1990, a new reality, 1989, a new reality set in, the continent of Africa through the African Organization of African Unity committed itself to adjust, to adapt to the new realities of what we were promised to be a new world order that had emerged out of the Cold War. Now, Africa was one of the worst devastated from the time of the Cold War. As I'm saying, that the state that was emerging was never allowed to have its full potential. and were therefore pushed to a position where also our own independence never really met its full potential, and was still at that point today a very rich continent, but very poor populations. It's a very serious contradiction, and it explains what happened. So in 1990, we adjusted, committed ourselves to the new norms that were being established in terms of how the international new order was going to come. We welcomed that, made the necessary adjustments, dealt with all the challenges that we were faced with, created new institutions on the continent to adjust and deal with this new reality. But it has not taken us anywhere that much. Now, when we talk of the new normal, then the features of this new normal is one of the issues that we need to address. So what is it that it positions us or imposes on us as Africans to adjust to? What is it that will be new, that will bring hope to our people? Now, climate change is not one of the issues that we have to look at and see how best we are going to be able to adjust to that, because it fuels some of the conflicts that we're having in the continent. Your opening remarks, one of the things you said about Africa, you talked about instability. Instability brought about by what? A number of factors. These are the issues that we'll have to address. The question of coups, we thought we had addressed that in the manner in which the decisions we took in 1999 on unconstitutional takeover of government, and subsequently some of the adjustments that we had to make. But we're not out of the woods yet. We've got new forms of unconstitutional forms of government which we have to adjust to and find ways of dealing with. New conflicts or forms of instability in terms of asymmetrical warfare that is taking place in the continent. Insurgencies that we're seeing all over the show, and some of the issues that have been earlier referred to, like what is happening in the Sudan, in the Sahel, in our own region, in the Horn of Africa. These are the issues that we have to deal with. So we have to start reflecting, as we have done even sometime last week, to look at our own peace and security architecture as to whether it is still fit for purpose and it responds to the current challenges and needs in terms of the changes even in warfare and the landscape of the conflicts that we're faced with. But additionally, we also have to look at how we relate to the United Nations, particularly the Security Council. All the conflicts that are taking place in Africa dominate the agenda of the Security Council. But as a continent, we are not integrated in a manner in which you can effectively make a contribution in what happens in finding the solutions to our continent. Even the attempts to establish cooperation between the United Nations and the Peace and Security Council, the AU, has not yet materialized. So there's a lot of things that we need to do. For us, the new normal will be judged on the basis of whether, from the time of colonialism through the Cold War, and what we have experienced in this unipolar world, whether the emerging multipolar world has bring about any promises, and we're prepared this time not to be shaped by events, but to contribute towards shaping the world in which we can live. and how to ensure that even our mineral resources that are becoming a source of the problems that we're facing, the relationships that we have with the rest of the world, is something that we'll have to take very seriously.
Great. I want to get back to your point about the preparedness for the future and what Africa needs to have more agency in the world order of the future. But just before that, I'd like to go briefly back to our speakers. With Kathy, you spoke of this transition, and part of this transition is inevitably defined by the war in Ukraine. And that war has reshaped Europe's security posture, to speak very broadly. But it has also, I think, reshaped Europe's role in the world. Can you speak a little bit more to how you see, Europe's role in the world given the situation that is faced in Ukraine now?
So I think we need to be careful. I'm just looking at the results where it's talking about permanent and temporary.
I've just noticed it as well.
Because this is not about temporary, this is about transition. And Europe needs to become more resilient in two particular ways. The first is, as Europe collaborating together, we have the European Union. My country took the decision to leave the EU, but it did not leave Europe. And there's a need to make sure that European nations recognize that as a continent and as a group of countries, they have huge responsibilities internally to address not just the economic challenges that many countries are facing, but the national security and defense challenges. And you see that translated in very simplistic ways with, we'll all spend up to 5% of GDP and so on. But underneath the figures has got to be a recognition that you need to work together. And as you and I know well, the EU is good at that in some ways and less good in others. And I think increasingly it's finding it really difficult to work together. So that's the first part of it. And then I think secondly, it's an understanding that when I think of this transition, it's as if somebody has thrown all the pieces up in the air and we don't quite know what the structure's going to look like when they land. And that's our job. Our job is to make sure when the pieces do land, it's a structure that is different, but is going to provide for the people of the world, but especially in each country, the people of those nations. And it's going to continue to develop the way in which we want to live in ways that we understand. For some countries, that's about elected governments. For others, it's about monarchies. For others, it's about systems of government that work for the people that they choose to serve. And it's about the dignity of the human spirit. It's about providing for people in the best possible way. So the second part of what happens to Europe is what is the world it wants to live in when this war is finally done. And one final and most important element is the support for the sovereignty and integrity of a nation under attack, and a recognition that wars do not end with straight lines and with easy solutions. They end with ragged edges and with very difficult decisions and with compromises in the best and worst sense of that word. Compromise is a word that's kind of lost its currency. But there are things that will need to be done. I don't mean compromising with Russia's intentions. I mean with working out how best to provide greater security. And this must be Europe's job within its own continent, within its own landmass, with the support and help of the institutional framework that we finally see when the peace is settled.
Well, Ambassador Bárcena, I'm looking also at the poll in the room, and it seems that the vote for now is in favor that this is permanent rather than transitional. So it falls on you to give us more enthusiasm and optimism for the future, to convince our audience that things we're going through are transitional. I hope, can you speak a little bit to how Latin America is dealing with the geopolitical divide in the world, because that is something that I think is quite important for us to look at in terms of lessons from your part of the world. It's China, America, traditional partners, non-traditional partners, the Gulf, the United Arab Emirates coming in more actively in the region. How do you navigate this? Are there any lessons there that you can share that others can use as well?
Well, as I said before, I think to speak about an approach from Latin America to the power competition is not very precise, because we are a deeply divided region, as I said, in approaching the role of state, democracy, organized crime, justice, and the rival power. What we agreed in Latin America is that a model should not be imposed on Latin America, but it is that the same Latin American countries that had to look for a model for the region and for a model for the future. So in that sense, we agree that a key principle for all Latin American countries is the non-intervention. And that principle of non-intervention comes from history. Mexico lost in the 19th century half of its territory to the US, and some other Latin American countries have suffered only also continuous intervention. And what we have learned from history is that intervention and the use of force does not bring necessarily good results. So dealing with this power competition it has this common ground on non-intervention and self-determination, but at the same time, it goes to each country choosing its partners. And for Mexico, it's of course the US, because we share 3,000 kilometers of border, 59 border crossings, 38 million of Mexicans of first, second, or third generation in the US. And now we are the largest with a Hispanic minority, the largest minority in the US. So the answer from Mexico would be different from the answer of Brazil, let's say, or Peru. Having said that, I think I am positive about being a temporary new normal now, because demographics and economics will change profoundly in the next 25 years.
Yeah.
Now, in the next 25 years, China, India, Indonesia, Brazil, Mexico, South Africa, the Gulf countries, Nigeria will completely change what we know now. We will be much more bigger in demographics, we will be much more bigger in economics, and thus we will need to have a greater voice in shaping this order. And this is something we're forgetting in this minute, because we see only the power competition, US and China, but we are not necessarily seeing that in 25 years this will completely change or change profoundly. So we have to act with what I think it's an increased dialogue among those so-called middle powers. The UAE, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, India, and Brazil, Mexico. Either we do it through G20, or we do it with or BRICS, or we do it through new mechanisms for consultation, but we have to do it. And we have to do it with no fear. No fear is key, because sometimes we say, okay, let's do the stand still that Ambassador Nusseibeh was saying. Stand still is not an option. So we have to go forward with no fear. And then what we have to look is promoting tolerance and values, not radical nationalism, because radical nationalism will not take us anywhere. And I agree with my dear colleague from South African Partnership. The UN is key now. We need the UN reform. And we will have an election of a new Secretary General next year. And we have seen that both in Ukraine, it really shocked me when I was looking to the to the extraordinary session of the UN Security Council when Russia was invading Ukraine, and they were denying it in the Security Council. So what we were looking was the complete paralysis of the UN. Yeah. And this we cannot allow. We have really to push for but a reform UN which gives voice and that upholds international law. And international law is key for all these middle powers and for all the developing world. If we don't uphold international law, then we will not be able to do this transition.
Thank you for those contributions. Ambassador Sarna, one of the questions that is getting a lot of thumbs up from our audience here, and is something that I wanted to ask you in any case, and that is, do you see in this period of transition the role of middle powers in reshaping global cooperation different? India has been quite active in many-lateral arrangements around the world and promoting this role of middle powers. Can you speak a little bit more to how you see that role going forward?
Yes, I think each middle power would act in its own context, as I say again, in the sense that depends where they are in this geopolitical rivalry. You did mention India, and India has a very specific situation. We have been promoting and projecting a policy of what we call strategic autonomy. Some say that this is non-alignment 2.0, but the fact is that in today's world, we want to be able to take our decisions based on our national interests. And towards that end, we have been building relationships with the great powers or the big powers, as well as with different regions, as well as being very active in a plurilateral situation besides the UN. So, you find us part of the Quad. You also find us part of the SCO and BRICS. So I think this is something this is a diplomatic dance in which the space is very, very constrained. It's an increasingly antagonistic place. When the relationships, say, with US and China were quiet, it was easier for us. If US-Russia relationship improves, it becomes easier for us. Otherwise, as you can see, the middle powers can also become the target. The United States says we're putting 50% tariffs on you because you have been buying Russian oil. And therefore, India becomes a victim of the failure to end the war in Ukraine. So the middle powers have a role. They will leverage what strength they can. They will leverage their geography. They will leverage their liaisons and their groupings with other middle powers. So I think the future is looking more, perhaps, I wish the UN could be reformed and revived, but I think the future is going to be more as to, what we call bespoke coalitions of the willing, issue-based coalitions. And there is the rather amorphous concept of the global south,
yes,
which is a collection of small powers and middle powers. If the global south can get its act together, and it does at times, they have their real concerns, and their biggest concern is that their voice is not being heard in this geopolitical competition and this era of competition. So I would say that specifically to your question, I think the middle powers can act in concert, and the middle powers can also leverage each one of them for their own situations. But again, it depends upon strength. You cannot leverage without strength. And that strength will have to be built up by each country. And numbers help.
Numbers matter.
Numbers matter. So, if the middle powers do hang around together, it will help. I'm very conscious of the time, so I'm not going to, take more.
Well, numbers matter. They do matter indeed. So, Ambassador Welile, one of the other question that is really exciting our audience, I think, is, where is the reform of the multilateral system going, and how, I would rephrase that question to you to say, how is it from an African perspective, how do you make multilateralism more fair and inclusive going forward? Because Africa has been quite critical of the international rules-based order as being more, as was said earlier, just rules, not fair in the past. So, you have the numbers. You're going to have more of the numbers in the future, because by the end of the century, sub-Saharan Africa will be 4.5 times bigger than China's current population. You have the numbers in terms of resources and the numbers in terms of people. So what would a fair-based rules order look from an African perspective? More of a philosophical question, I suppose.
We're not there when the United Nations was established. We're still under colonial domination. Most of us, most of the African countries. And we're able to find ourselves and define a path, particularly the Bandung Conference, together with all the other countries that were emerging and those that were still under colonialism, to determine a path of survival and development. That's one. But I think for the international system to survive, for the United Nations to survive, there are three pillars of the UN that must make sure that they remain steadfast and do not collapse. That's the three pillars of the Charter. That is peace and security. That's why for us, the question of the United Nations Security Council becomes paramount.
Okay.
Our role and participation in the affairs of that council in a much more meaningful way is one of the things that will continue and insist that the reforms that have happened up to now, because there have been some reforms, are not sufficient. They're not addressing our issues on the continent. So we would want to be part of the decisions that are made there in a manner in which you can participate in shaping the very rules and methods of work of the United Nations, because that's where part of the problem is. And the way it is structured, the role of the P5 versus the rest. All of those things need to be re-examined and adjusted. We have to ensure that that pillar of peace and security, which is the first pillar of the United Nations Charter, is preserved and consolidated. It's not going to be easy, it's going to be difficult, but this has to be done. 2, human rights. There is no way that we can not refocus on that one, because stemming out of that, there are many other issues that we can be able. So institutionally, we have to deal with all the challenges that are related to this, including issues of inequality that and governance that create problems in terms of how things around. So those institutions within the United Nations have to be also strengthened, and the capacity to respond appropriately and effectively to those challenges, not only in the committee, third commission of the General Assembly, third committee of the General Assembly, but what happens in Geneva. It's very critical for us, because that's where collectively we are able and can be able to reflect and see how best we can deal and strengthen that pillar. The last one is socio-economic transformation. that's a very critical. All these other issues that we've been talking about in terms of areas in which the SDGs and whichever way you look at, we'll have to look at the current processes that are taking place, UN 80, arising of the Pact of the Future, have got some disturbing elements in terms of whether there is a political will to meet the challenges that we can see that will continue to be there. The shift in terms of a focus that is currently under debate, which will be debated, but towards the end of this month, is going to give us an indication as to which direction things are going. The Pact of the Future have a lot of challenges and problems that we have to arise to in order to ensure that these pillars that I've talked about can be able to be addressed. For us, multilateralism is one of the systems that without which we cannot move. Of course, as my colleague has said here about the BRICS, the G20, for us, they mean quite a lot, and that's where we have to find a space to enhance cooperation rather than and minimize this conflict that is looming from time to time and the wars that are threatening us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, the goal of this panel was to not find definitive answers to any of these questions, but to open them up for the rest of the day and tomorrow. And I suppose what we've just illustrated, that whether it's transition or permanent, the state of the world really depends on, is reflected by the saying, where you stand depends on where you sit. Whether you're in Europe, Latin America, India, or Africa, the world looks quite different. But what brings us, I think, all together is this idea that we are entering a new phase. We don't know where that phase will end. We know we need to do a lot of changes, institutional, to our practices. We need to adapt. And I hope during the rest of the day, we will be able to discuss that. So please join me in thanking our panel for opening up these issues for the rest of the conference today.
Thank you, Nikolay.